Hello, this is Professor Mike Labasi. This is from my CIS 2808 Introduction to Forensics, and this is Topic 2, looking at the investigation process. It sort of is really just a carryover of Topic 1. Topic 1 is more of a general look, and I really focused on more specific items in there I thought were important. So with Topic 2, we will see that the actual objectives are understanding the actual process a little more in depth, and especially the phases, pre-investigation, first response, and investigation phase and post. Definitely going to focus more on investigation and some aspects that I think are very important from this chapter. Again, make sure you read the whole chapter to get a full understanding, but I'll just summarize what I think is an important part of that. So anyways, for Module 2, for the computer forensics investigation process, usually when you go into investigations, there's some goals in mind. And it could be, that could be given to you from a current investigation. It could be, of course, outlined in a search warrant or an investigation case. But it might be, you have this hypothesis formulation criteria. And of course, this goes hand in hand with, which I liked, which of course was Locard's principle, right? So we need to track a suspect. We need to find any possible evidence. This was the activity, and the activity might infer things like online activity, of course, mobile device, or types of files you're looking for. Is it email investigation? Is it a malware investigation? So again, go on and on with that kind of investigation. But you can see where this might help formulate that. So you might have this hypothesis formulation criteria. You either need to prove or disprove it. And that could be part of this too. Is part of it could be with suspect A, B, and C. The quicker you can get two suspects disproved because of your formulation and your hypothesis testing. So there's some examples here on the slide. I'm not going to read those out loud here, but realize this is a possibility you might use when you do move into an actual process. Now, it's also going to lead into what's called tool selection. So again, we have a hypothesis formulation, we have a design for our experiment. This might, of course, tell us what we need to have certain tools in place. And an important part of this is what tools you use and your lab setup. Is very important. That, again, I think I mentioned before, if I didn't, I'll mention it plenty of times, keeping very detailed notes. The version of the tool is used, what station it was used on, version of Linux, OS, Linux, Windows, whatever the workstation is. All those little aspects need to be kept into notes. And these tools should either be commercial if they're all open source. There is a sort of, I mentioned before, there's things out there. There's the guidelines, the scientific working group, for example. There's ISO standards that help guide and set up a lab. And the better you confer to an ISO or NIST standards or the scientific working groups guidelines, the better it is for you to prove you have a proper lab in place. Easily could be used to find stuff inadmissible if you don't have any kind of quality assurance in place to test your tools and prove they are working as intended, because that could be called into testimony. So very important, the quality assurance aspect of this, and the chapter goes into detail about it, very important. So I know when I talked with the FBI lab in Cincinnati, they go through constant tool testing and updates. It's almost a full-time job just to keep the lab running versus just working in the lab. So, and I think they actually had the individuals, technicians, that's all their job was to ensure tool sort of validity and testing and all the documentation behind it. So, a very important aspect there. Keep that in mind. And of course, probably the biggest thing is to ensure integrity of the investigation. All digital evidence is fragile in nature, and this is probably mentioned before in a previous one. It is so critical to have this proved, especially in cases in a court of law. So that's probably the bolt right there I want to come off is that is very, very important. ensure the integrity of the evidence. And as this chapter starts to lead into, there's some other stuff in further modules up ahead where how to create this sort of valid forensic copy of evidence. But we're going to move further into that there. So, same computer lab, a lot of aspects here. Budgeting, physical design, work area considerations, what kind of network. I know the lab they had network computers and they had unnetworked computers that were totally air gapped. For any case that might be trying to deal with any kind of malware, you don't want to set off malware and have it affect your entire lab and bring the lab down. So it could be, and of course, virtual machines, of course, things like that. So building your team, of course, is something that would consider. But understanding just the hardware and software requirements of your course forensics lab itself. One of the important things about this one like this is write blockers. This is and drive duplicators. These are two very, very they're very critical tools. And the idea being, you have a suspect machine, and you use the write blocker and drive duplicator to show you did a read-only copy of that drive or that thumb drive or that phone or whatever the device is or storage media. And it's very important that that can be, of course, shown as tested and valid, because you don't ever want to show that you have, of course, did anything with the original evidence besides make a forensic copy of it. So, so those write blockers, I think we'll look at those later on too. Some things to keep it in mind. When you come in, the first responder, if you're not in the lab, you're a first responder for a investigation process, for a digital investigation. Even though there is, of course, photographers of the scene and stuff, it's always valid to have photographs of the scene as a setup. So, how the computer was it on, was it off, how is it sitting? Of course, interviews might be done by investigators, agents, but those interviews could lead into information about the system. Big thing we're talking about is search warrants, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But dealing with the evidence and so on, the packet evidence transplant. So, big thing, of course, is the initial assessment of the scene itself, and then the text goes into this, but that's a very important thing. Pictures, videos of everything. What was plugged into what was the status of every device, and all the devices, printers, network routers, things like that, even if it's a home or if it's a business. So that's the first process here. So we can see these are 8 steps. They're very important. Some of these I'm just going to bounce through really quick. We're definitely going to steps 4 and 5 there. We're going to definitely have talk mostly there and do some demo around there also. But yeah, again, as I mentioned before, photographing the scene, sketching the scene, get the front and back computer systems, if possible, label what cable is plugged into what. And then we actually have search and seizure. So a big part is before you even entered the scene, could be there's a search warrant in place. This might indicate even what you can grab as evidence. So location, name of the suspect, and this information could be very valuable. It can be very important in the very part of the chain of custody, because if we don't know what this evidence is for, it gets lost in the shuffle. I mean, hard drives stacked up together look like hard drives, and if you don't have them bagged and tagged correctly, and a sort of chain of custody, who has had the hard drive in their hand, where to go to, and a safe place to store these actual phones, hard drives, thumb drives, you name it. So we need to have this is where the lab comes into play. So very important. You hit this overhead, this maintenance and maintain of this chain of custody is very important. So again, search warrants could be, search without a warrant may be allowed in certain cases. So if you're called in from a company, warrantless search, for example, or they're given authority to search, it could be a company has called you in. It could be a civil case. It could be an internal-only matter. So there might not be any kind of, even though there might be constitute evidence of criminal activity, the actual devices, that those are owned by a company who then has given you permission to go and search. So not a warranty for everything, but be a warrant if anything is taken without a warrant, could be inadmissible in court. So anyways, seizing evidence, serial numbers, names, tamper evidence bags, and the chapter goes into all the little details of this. You can imagine how important this is, that this stuff is handled correctly. So another big one too is this, dealing with computers. Are they powered on? Are they powered off? And if they are, how do you deal with those? The book goes into the detail about that. Typically, if it's on, you leave it on. If it's off, you leave it off. If it's on, then is it unlocked, not unlocked? This is an important point here is if you think you need the stuff from RAM, then you know you don't want to get it before you turn the computer off or it's shut off and transported. So review that. Very important to understand that. And of course, different authorities and different jurisdictions might have different rules for this, but typically there's some best practices there. Again, is the screen viewable? Is the monitor viewable? Is it on a screensaver? If it wakes up, record the date and time that this occurs. Take photographs of the screen. Sounds funny. Don't take screenshots on the computer. Use a different device. And if possible, if you need to, then pull the power cord. And it sounds crazy. Most of the time, it depends. You might need to either power off properly or leave it logged in, but just pull the power, especially for a desktop. Of course, a laptop will be hard to do because when you log off a user, it re-encrypts everything. So it might be better to leave it as not shutting off properly. And this is going to be a case-by-case basis here, of course. If it's movable, if it's possible, remove the battery, unplug the power from the wall socket. If it's not possible, press the power off, force power off. So the chapter goes into the guidelines for this. And again, photograph and document everything on the scene. So preserving the evidence. Very, very big deal, of course, is, again, mentioned before, transportation, some sort of logbook, bagging and tagging, case numbers, search warrant numbers, things like that. Information about what's inside the chain of custody. Chain of custody should be a record of all evidence that's been handled. So again here, case number, name of the who received it, address, location, number of items. So pretty important that it is very strictly followed, especially for criminal cases. And of course, you need a controlled environment, a laboratory to hold it in. Maybe some safe we keep the actual original evidence in. Now, actually, time to acquire the data itself. So there's a process of imaging here, and actually, we go into this into further chapters or modules. So coming up, we actually will see more details about this. But it is very important that you you can forensically process and examine the collected data, extract information from that. There's a process of imaging and verifying the accuracy of what was acquired. And so why is this? You never, ever should use the original evidence for analysis at all means. So that means you take a forensic copy of it. And again, I feel like here we're actually going to go into understanding this and 4. So we have future topics, we're going to talk about that here, but understand the concept early is very important. If all possible, you should never use the original evidence for analysis. So that means making duplicates of it. Typically there's all kinds of stuff, DD for example, there's apps that can make that. It's a bit-by-bit copy typically. And this is a pretty important thing, is a hash value for the original data generated and matched to verify its integrity. That is probably one of the most important steps here, because you can be called in and saying, well, yeah, you made a copy of that. How do you know that that copy is original? That it's an exact copy. Think like the defense attorney. What would they call in the question? So, once you can prove that it is valid, then you can go ahead and dive into it with all kinds of analysis tools. So, So before we go into the analysis tool, let's talk about this forensic copy process here. So I have here, this is the iLab, and there are different tools and different places you can find this. For example, you have HashCalc, and there's a couple things installed here from this module. And in the case you can see MD5 calculator. So it gives me an MD5 for this confidential.pdf file. Now if I make a copy of it, let's copy this to, I'll put it on desktop, paste. Then if I go ahead and MD5 that one there, of course I can copy that value out of there. We can compare it with the original. And there's an equal sign there. I mean, these are both exactly the same. So without going too in depth, what is this MD5? So there is a series of different algorithms. Typically used, MD5 is no longer used. It was used for cryptography to secure authentication, but it is no longer used for that. But it's still useful to show is bit by bit exactly the same. Now there's something called hash collisions. I'm not going to get into in depth with that, but you can see here it processes it by 512-bit strings broken into 16 words. And there's a whole process of this. The idea being, if I change the front of the file, it doesn't change the front of the hash, the output. If I change the middle of it, it doesn't change the middle of it. So if one bit is off, though, the number does not match. And that is the hash value. Now there are other hash values alternatives. You're going to see this throughout the course here. SHA-1 and the SHA family. Typically SHA 128. 256 is probably the big one. So often you might see multiple hashes run for multiple pieces of evidence. And that can be done here. So we can do this with HashCalc. So you can see here we can actually go ahead and grab that file from the desktop, and I can get SHA-1, MD5, 256. Don't need those. It's probably the best right there. We can calculate those hashes. Now you can see they're different lengths. Let's go and close that. And this, of course, would be part of your documentation for documenting evidence. There we go. So no surprise, the larger the hash, the longer the hash length. So hashes are fixed sizes, and again, they're not. It doesn't mean that any part of this PDF is changed. In the front doesn't change the front of the hash or the middle of the hash. So keep that in mind. And this is what's used to show you have an exact copy. Now, how's that used? Again, you might use this to document. Of course, you have the version of this and so on. This goes into your notes and into the report. So it could be even used here. So, for example, here we have a directory called safe. And in there I have a read-only copy of a Windows evidence file. So I can MD5 sum. And of course, this is a large file. It's like 2.1 gig. So it takes a little longer to run. And then if I go ahead and CD to home, I see I have a copy of it here. Now how can I show that this is the same copy as this? Now, yeah, it looks like the same date and time. You can't use that. Even size, don't use the actual size, which you can see here. What you want to do is we want to show it is an exact copy. So MD5 sum. And so this is on the Linux system. You can see it. There's tools for different operating systems to do this. We can see it is an exact copy. These both match. This is how you hold up in court. This is how you say that when we open this DD file and some sort of processing tool, maybe autopsy, and we dig into it, we start tearing it apart and we search through it, we are altering the file, but we're doing it in a way to collect evidence, and we're showing that the original file itself is an exact forensic copy of the one we have in a read. This is a read-only copy. You can see here, read-only copy in the safe. So Anyways, so that is a very important aspect. I just want to demo that for you. And the lab for this module, you definitely go and you do some stuff with hashing. Again, later on, we're going to go into how to create those copies, the acquisition of that, but keep that in mind. So again, after we have a forensic copy, not the original, then we can dump into the tools we have. It might depend on the scope of the case, the requirements, what we're looking for. And the different things you might actually create here is you might look for a temporal, relational, or functional evidence, sort of reconstruction of that. So hence, temporal, we're looking for events over time. So and a lot of these tools actually will create a timeline. So you might be able to open like a email inbox, and I think Topic2 has a way to create an email timeline of emails when they were sent and received. Great way to go ahead and organize that, and that's what timeline generation is there. Could be order of relevance. You find a passwords in a hidden document that were passwords used to hack something. That definitely is going to be some scathing evidence there versus more incremental, more small evidence. So as we paint the timeline. So again, go through the analysis, case analysis, and then we go back to our course, looking at our actual hypothesis. So and our plan. You can spend forever analyzing the case. You might need to only have so much time and find the most relevant evidence. So there's a lot of course, factors. It's going to be, no pun intended, case-by-case basis. So here's what we talked about before. We're temporal analysis, relational analysis, and functional analysis. So those are three good ways to look at it. How we reconstruct the evidence itself. Some of these can be fragments. Realize that some might be not direct evidence, but they could be help show activity over time. And relational can definitely do that. It records the actions of the suspect. So, example, a phone shows a location. The phone itself does not have a video or picture of whatever the crime was, but the phone was on the suspect, and that is then shown to be pinged off cell tower logs to be in the location that the crime happened. So keep that in mind. Reporting, definitely going to talk about reporting later in this course. Realize it is a huge part. Probably the biggest part of this, I like to say, is you want to be sure you have very, very detailed notes that could be shared with other team members. What happens if you're gone and so you need to take over someone else's case? So we'll go to the next one, which is, of course, is testifying. So keep that in mind. Very important that you have very detailed notes that are safe and stored. Again, it could be that the software is updated since the last time you've done it. If you need to go back and maybe testify, become an expert witness. So read the section on that. There's a lot of aspects to this, what expert witness is, what testifying is. Definitely you either could be the expert witness explaining why to a jury, why an MD5 hash shows that it is a copy, an exact copy bit by bit. So how you do that. And a good thing is there could be stuff you might need to set up presentations. It could be a board, it could be a slide deck, it could be anything that is used to sort of teach someone why at the very best way to boil it down to the basics, to teach. I hate the word use the layman, why MD5 hash or this hash shows it's an exact copy, because of course the defense will try to claim it's not. You made a copy of it, it's not the original. You might of course show that the best practice is never to touch the original. We want to preserve it as it was at the scene. So anyways, that's a good look at this chapter. Again, it is very much a continuation of the previous module, and which is sort of this computer and forensics today's world. This is really more diving into the process, and we're going to get into the actual steps and actual forensics work. So anyways, that is it for module 2, and thank you for watching.